some positive leftist news.
With BP. Wait, not the oil company, okay?
What's poppin' is big villains to overthrow media. Your comrade revolutionary, dope-ass MC, and international sex symbol, yeah. Today, we're gonna get into some positive leftist news. But wait, where's my teleprompter? Hey, what's up, y'all?
The Federal Court of Australia has recognized that the Widjibouweeable hold title over approximately 11,700 hectares around the Lismore area. The settlement of the title claim includes an agreement to disregard historical extinguishment of native title in national parks within the claim area, paving the way for future recognition of the native title over an additional 2,600 hectares of national parks. The Widjibouweeable are part of the Bundjalung Nation, who have cared for the land and waters in the claim area for thousands of years. It's fantastic to see that land return, bringing us one step closer to land back everywhere. Since early January, thousands of Palestinians and Israelis protesters have taken to the streets in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, and cities in occupied Palestine. The series of actions are in response to a series of repressive measures imposed since Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right government took office in December. These measures include an absolutely egregious ban on Palestinian flags. Over 20,000 activists united in a Together Against Fascism and Apartheid protest in Tel Aviv, January 7th. On January 13th, in Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, left-wing Israeli activists joined Palestinian activists in raising the Palestinian flag, defying the ban. A day later, on January 14th, over 100,000 protesters turned out in Tel Aviv and two other cities, again defying the ban on flags and denouncing Netanyahu's government as criminal. Global solidarity actions have also taken place in the past few months, including hundreds of people rallying in Brooklyn on January 29th to honor the martyrs of the Palestinian struggle. As Bezzy Pay of the Workers' World writes, it is imperative that all forces globally who are in solidarity with Palestine and opposed to Israeli occupation join forces. Palestinians need this unity more than ever. No conditions should be placed on how Palestinians in occupied territories carry out their resistance. Solidarity with the activists worldwide standing up for a free Palestine. On the 1st of February, 500,000 workers in the UK went on strike, in the nation's largest work stoppage since 2011. The major unions who participated in the strike included the National Education Union, University and College Union, Public and Commercial Service Unions, Rail, Maritime, and Transport Unions, and the Trade Unions Congress, who were buttressed by the many thousands of supporters. These unions sprung into action when Parliament passed new anti-strike legislation that Monday, expecting to be enforced by the summer. The strike's minimum service levels bill grants ministers the power to force limits on the number of striking workers during a work stoppage in the key sectors of the economy. The first sector to be clamped down on will be rail and emergency services. Ministers will then set their sights on the entire transport, health, and education sectors. Needless to say, this vicious assault on workers' rights cannot stand. This legislation, combined with pension cuts, underfunding, and stagnant wages in the face of increasing living costs, have awakened the UK working class. More days of strikes have already been announced by major unions. Even if these actions don't stop the House of Lords from passing the bill, Scotland Yard can't arrest 500,000 angry workers. PLN will be keeping a close eye on this story as it develops. Over 2 million people in France held a general strike on January 19th to oppose Macron's attempts to reform pension and raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. There were over 200 separate marches in various cities, not only rejecting the reforms, but demanding that the legal retirement age drop to 60. All the major French political left-wing and social democratic parties joined the coalition under the leadership of the labor unions. The level of organization and the breadth of the protests put enormous pressure on Macron and the Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne. The 400,000 people who protested in Paris had an impact on the president. Instead of facing them, Macron fled to Spain with 11 of his top ministers. But workers didn't stop there. Demonstrators have taken to the streets 3 more times, with the latest mobilization on February 13th, drawing 500,000 people in Paris. Fabien Roussel, National Secretary of the French Communist Party, said, "We are going to make the walls of the LZ tremble. All together, all together. All power to the French working class uniting in struggle." There have been several other major mobilizations across Europe this month as well. 50,000 people participate in the Ireland for All anti-racism march in Dublin, organized by a coalition that includes community groups, trade unions, and political parties. In Portugal, more than 150,000 school teachers and their supporters marched through Lisbon to demand pay increases, less punishing schedules, and faster career progression. And 250,000 people marched in Madrid on February 12th to oppose the dismantling of the public health system by the capital region's right-wing government. Let the ruling class tremble. Working are united and won't be defeated. A judge in Ontario, Canada, has denied the municipality of Kitchenger's request to clear a homeless encampment, building on decisions out of British Columbia that he says establish a constitutional right for a person to shelter themselves if accessible indoor spaces aren't available. The region of Waterloo shamelessly asked the court to fine the 50 unhoused people in the camp in violation of the region's trespassing law. But the Ontario Superior Court of Justice declared that the bylaw violates the charter's right of the encampment residents because of the region's lack of adequate shelter spaces. Justice Michael Valente's ruling stated, "I am not satisfied that the region has adequate capacity to shelter the approximately 50 encampment residents, given that its shelter are not low barrier or truly accessible, just as British Columbia cases have found." So too do I conclude that the ability to provide adequate shelter for oneself is a necessity of life that falls within the right to life protected by Section 7 of the Charter. This is a precedent-setting ruling that housing rights activists say could have a lasting impact on the cities across Ontario. Housing advocate Daphne Nussbaum said, "Municipalities are going to be very careful moving forward about how they're working with their encampment communities." Harlem families and grassroots community groups gathered on January 28th to protest the operation of a truck stop, which they say was opened in retaliation for their rejection of the gentrification project known as 145. The predominantly working-class Black community successfully shut down 145, a proposed $700 million luxury high-rise project that included no affordable units, a clear gentrification and replacement effort that did not address the community's housing needs. The Unified Black Caucus organized the community against the development, forcing the developer, Teotobun, to withdraw the project. However, he then dumped a toxic truck depot where the housing project would have been. The current protests are demanding that the idling truck stop be shut down and that Teotobun meet with the community activists to discuss building housing that better fits their needs. As Richie Marino writes, the people of Harlem have had radical history of struggle against imperialist, capitalist, and white supremacist forces, and will undoubtedly prevail with class solidarity. Housing is for people, not for profit. Harlem is not for sale. Over 3,000 people gathered in Berlin at the annual Rosa Luxemburg Conference, organized by the socialist newspaper Jung Welt, with an additional 15,000 people joining online. Anti-militarism was the center theme of the conference, with speakers such as Malayan Minister Amanita Traore, who highlighted how European military intervention in her home country have exacerbated violence. Participants also heard from renowned revolutionaries such as imprisoned journalist Mumia Abu Jamal and Cuban doctor and daughter of Che Guevara, Alida Guevara. Following the conference, the German Communist Party held an event to outline the task for the coming year. There was roughly 500 party members in attendance, alongside representatives from the Cuban and Venezuelan embassies. Chairman Patrick Kiobel said, "What we are experiencing is a struggle of imperialism, of U.S. imperialism, NATO, and the EU to maintain their hegemony. But they are beginning to falter. Large parts of the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, no longer want to dance to their tune. We are witnessing the birth of a new world order. This will not yet replace the hegemony of imperialism with a hegemony of socialism, but I can provide more spaces for the struggle for it. This might not sound like much, and it will not be without danger, but it can be the first step towards setting the seemingly fossilized relations in motion. The wave of unionization sweeping the U.S. shows no signs of stopping. This month, over 2,000 Johns Hopkins University grad workers unionized, with 97% voting yes. The Union Teachers and Researchers United wrote, "We know that when we organize together, we win. True UE is entering the beginning of its next phase, forming a bargaining committee and putting together a winning contract that delivers improvements from wages to worker conditions, to improve international student support that will guarantee graduate workers get the respect and dignity for the hard work they do. For now, grad workers, pat yourself on the back and celebrate this historic win." In more good news, a Peace Coffee location in North Davis, California voted 14-1 to unionize, becoming the first of the chain's 200 stores in the U.S. to do so. The dancers of Ballet Memphis also voted to unionize, despite a union-busting campaign from the management. And the 91 members of the HuffPost Union have unanimously ratified a new collective bargaining agreement with the management at HuffPost and BuzzFeed. The contract increases salary minimums by approximately 10%, equating to a raise of $5,000 to $8,000 for several members. The lowest salary minimum at HuffPost will now be $66,625, the highest negotiated for any WGAE online media contract. As their press release states, it's a testament to the power of solidarity. But wait, there's more. Last month reported on the HarperCollins strike, where workers had gotten creative in turning popular book titles into messages of protest. We're thrilled to report now that these workers held the line and won a new contract. Under the new terms, annual starting pay will increase to $47,500 upon ratification and rise to $50,000 by the beginning of 2025. In addition, full-time employees in the union will receive lump sum payments of $1,500. The contract also allows for more time for union members to meet during work hours, requires that a welcome letter from the union be included in the job packet for eligible new hires, and establishes a joint labor management committee to discuss issues of concern to either party. Say it with me now. The union makes us strong. In Durban, South Africa, dock worker union reps met with a conference to mark the 50th anniversary of the 1973 Durban strikes. Unions attending the conference included the International Longshore and Warehouse Union based in the U.S. West Coast, the Revolutionary Transport Union of South Africa, and the General Industry Workers Union of South Africa. In 1973, 100,000 African and Indian workers went on strike over wages and worker conditions. The strike impacted more than 100 companies and led to the formation of the Federation of South Africa Trade Unions and the Congress of South African Trade Unions, which played a pivotal role in the liberation struggle against apartheid. In 1984, members of the ILWU's San Francisco Bay Area Local 10 and 34 refused to offload South African cargo for 11 days, inspiring local residents to join the U.S. anti-apartheid movement. ILWU Local 10 retired Secretary-Treasurer Clarence Thomas said dock workers have more leverage than any workers in the world, being at the point of the global supply chain, because when we shut down rail, trucking, cargo flight schedules, The food we eat, the fuel we put in our cars, computers, handheld devices, and the shoes we wear all come off those ships. There are no workers in the world that understand capitalism better than the longshore workers, because before the cargo can be stored, it has to come off the ship. And if we don't load or offload it, nothing is going to happen. The government of Burkina Faso has forced French military forces to leave their country. The French military had originally entered in 2013 to allegedly prevent jihadists strengthened by the NATO-led war in Libya. Over the past years, anti-French rhetoric and coups have increased throughout North Africa and the Sahel. For example, in February 2022, Mali's government removed the French military via a coup on the basis that the French forces committed atrocities, harming civilians and colluded with insurgents. Burkina Faso is now following in the footsteps of Mali, despite being a nation rich in gold. Almost half of the Burkinabe population live below the poverty line, with most of their riches siphoned off by rich foreign companies. The ejection of the French military leaves the nation one step closer to gaining independence and autonomy from imperialist intervention. During January 13th to the 22nd, the week of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, activists coordinated over 90 anti-war, anti-imperialist actions to demand the U.S. dismantle NATO and put an end to the U.S. imperialist wars abroad. To give just a few examples of these protests, in Portland, Oregon, 8 leftist groups united to fight back against capitalist wars. In Seattle, 50 students from University of Washington held a rally, marched and banner dropped to demand free Ahmed Sadet and all Palestinian prisoners. In downtown Oakland, marches chanted, "Cops here, bombs there, U.S. out of everywhere." And thousands of workers in Cleveland witnessed activists holding the banner, "Fund human needs, not U.S. NATO wars." The United National Anti-War Coalition aptly summarized the sentiment of these actions. As Martin Luther King Jr. so correctly reminded us, the U.S. is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Since World War II, the U.S. has initiated more than 60 military interventions in foreign countries. NATO and U.S. Western imperialism is an impediment to worker struggles everywhere. Solidarity with activists fighting to stop the wars and fund our communities. In the Philippines, activists and progressive groups have been protesting the government's Enhanced Defensive Cooperation Agreement. Under the EDCA, the U.S. military is granted further access to 4 local bases across the country. Such expansion has been widely decried by peace advocates and was met with leftist protests outside the presidential palace. Activists fear such U.S. military access will create pipelines for further imperialist interventions in the nation. The matter of asserting Philippine sovereignty and sovereign rights rests with the Filipinos, not any foreign power, said Renata Reyes, leader of Bagon Ayangsang Makabayan, or Bayan. It would be foolish to believe that the U.S., with its own geopolitical interests, is here to help us in asserting our sovereignty. In their statement, Bayan also warned that the expansion of EDCA sites may cause tensions in the region. Filipinos must not allow our country to be used as a staging ground for any U.S. military intervention in the region. On February 11th, over 200 students at an Alabama high school staged a walkout to protest the school's Black History Month program that disallowed the mention of anything that happened before the 1970s, including slavery, the Black Panthers, or the Civil Rights Movement. The protest led to a forum on the matter, in which students were supported to come up with a better education plan for the Black History Month. One student, Jemiah Brown, speaking of the walkout, stated, "I feel like it's important to talk about that because I feel like in 2023, a lot of our youth don't know their culture. This is important to educate our youth on how we came from somewhere to now." Congrats to all the youth who stood together to force change. Slovenia has, as of the 1st of February, become the first Eastern European and Balkan nation to recognize same-sex marriage as legal. In July 2022, Slovenia's court ruled that the banning of same-sex marriage and adoption was unconstitutional and discriminatory. In October of that same year, Slovenia's government passed a law to equalize marriage and adoption laws for same-sex couples. The resulting new family code, however, did not come into effect until February of this year. Luke Mezek, the leader of the Left Party, said, after several decades of struggle in this area, led by civil society, with persistent activist organizing, and in the recent years with persistent efforts of the left, we finally succeeded. Finland Parliament has voted 113 to 69 in favor of allowing trans people to legally change their gender solely via self-declaration, as opposed to a previous law which forced them to have to undergo a tedious and lengthy medical process. This law will also abolish the requirement for trans people to have to be unable to reproduce. Prior to this amendment, Finland's law forced trans people to undergo a psychiatric assessment and provide a medical certificate proving their sterility in order to legally be able to confirm their true gender. After several stumbling blocks preventing approval of this new law, the long-awaited amendments have finally been implemented. A very welcome win for trans rights. Hong Kong's top court has ruled that trans people will be able to legally change their gender on government-issued ID cards without the need of gender-affirming surgery. In 2019, trans activist Henry Edwards and another trans man known only publicly as Q filed a legal challenge to the current policy, in which trans people could only change their ID after they underwent surgery. They stated that the trans exclusionary policy outed trans people whenever they showed their ID to anyone. Finally, the court has ruled this is a violation of the right of privacy. Chief Justice Andrew and Justice P.J. Ribeiro and P.J. Falk wrote, the policy's consequence is to place persons like the appellants in a dilemma of having to choose whether to suffer regular violations of their privacy right or to undergo highly invasive and medically unnecessary surgery, infringing their rights to bodily integrity. Clearly, this does not reflect a reasonable balance. Say labeled the ruling the late justice, stating, we all dreamt that we would not be outed by our ID cards anymore, that we would no longer be rejected to cross borders and come back to Hong Kong, our home, and be stripped of our rights to marry and establish a family with 3 opposite sex. The Sri Lanka government has announced support for the decriminalization of same-sex relationships. At present, the country's colonial-era law rules same-sex relationships as acts of carnal knowledge against the order of nature, for which a person can be sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. The coming AMW endowment to the law is a huge win for local LGBTQ+ activists who have been campaigning for such changes for years. Equal Ground Executive Director Rosanna Flammer Caldera stated, it's been more than 19 years that our organization has been advocating for decriminalization, and it's good to see the work bearing fruit finally. On February 5th, over 10 million Ecuadorians voted in local elections for mayors, councilors, and prefectures, as well as for members of the Council for Citizens, Participation, and Social Control. In crucial regions of the nation, progressives were victorious. Recent referendums promoted by conservatives were rejected, and the leftist Citizens Revolutionary Movement Party made significant gains, such as winning prefectures in 9 of the 23 provinces, at mayor's offices in 60 cities. The party said in the statement, after more than 6 years of persecution, of taking away the legal status of our political organization, of unjustly imprisoning our comrades and forcing others to live in exile. In these 2023 sectional elections, we demonstrated that we are the main and largest political force in Ecuador. We are more alive than ever. It is a historic victory. A new era begins to recover Ecuador from the territories together with the people who know that we were better off before. NASA's recent satellite images show that Nepal's forest cover has almost doubled across the country between 1992 and 2016 due to nearby communities being placed in charge of conservation. Deputy Director of Research Jefferson Fox stated, once communities started actively managing the forest, they grew back mainly as a result of natural regeneration. This victory is even more compelling given that in the late 1970s, the World Bank issued a dire prediction that by the 1990s, the forest on Nepal's hills would mostly vanish, and by 2000, its plains would likely be barren after decades of deforestation from agriculture. The country initiated a community forestry program in 1978, whereby local groups would take charge of managing the land. This enabled locals to use forests for gathering food and firewood, but also make sure resources remained plentiful. They would benefit by keeping forests healthy. Now, around 22,000 local groups manage an estimated 2.3 million hectares of community forests in Nepal. Such successes are not surprising. Already, in the Amazon rainforest, Indigenous reciprocal land management has reduced deforestation, yet again confirming that Indigenous peoples are the best stewards of the land. Human compositing is now legal in 6 states across the U.S., after New York in February joined the list of states legalizing this environmentally friendly alternative to burial and cremation for human bodies. Human compositing involves shutting a body in a container filled with materials such as wood, chips, where during several weeks it decomposes. The resulting compost is then given to the deceased who can place it where they wish. Compared to conventional funeral methods, human compositing is far more environmentally friendly. Micah Truman, CEO of Washington-based human compositing company Returned Home, said a single cremation typically uses almost 30 gallons of fuel and emits an estimated 540 pounds of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and a person's ashes are not useful to the earth. Conventional burial, meanwhile, takes up a huge amount of space and commonly uses embalming fluid with formaldehyde, a known carcinogen. According to Truman, this is a huge step for accessible green death care nationwide. After years of discussion and campaigning by members of parliament, Ottawa, Canada, will finally ban the testing of cosmetics on animals. The ban will extend to cosmetics that contain animal testing ingredients and will cover products such as makeup, perfume, hairstyling products, and body lotions. Over 40 nations, including Britain, have already implemented a ban on cosmetic testing on animals. And in 2013, the EU introduced a total ban on animal cosmetic testing and the sale of cosmetics that were tested in such a manner. According to Charu Chandrasekhar, Executive Director of the University of Windsor Canadian Center for Alternative to Animal Methods, there are many proven alternatives to animal tests, she said. We have no excuse at all for not doing this. There are thousands of ingredients that have been tested already. Very happy news for our cutest animal comrades. Under newly elected President Lula, deforestation in the Amazon this January was down 61% from January last year. According to Reuters, WWF conservation specialist Daniel Silva said it was positive to see such a relevant drop in deforestation, even if he cautioned against calling it a full trend reversal. Since being elected, Lula's government has begun cracking down on illegal logging and has unfrozen environmental funds locked by former President Bolsonaro. Here's to this trend continuing and full recovery for one of the Earth's most important ecosystems. Comrades, if you have good news from the current month, please send your stories to totalliberationpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Javi for the positive news jams. Thank you to Cosmo for the positive news background. Thank you to Mexi, Catherine, and Jacob for the script writing and production. And thank you to Tristan for editing this video. And don't forget, thank you to yours truly for hosting this one. If you'd like to support the expansion of our team and output, please go to patreon.com/positive leftist news, or you can give us a one-time donation via PayPal. The link is in the description box below.
Good news. Yeah, come on. Sometimes